Welcome, everyone. I am totally delighted to be here with Lori O'Neill and with you as well. I'm so thrilled that you can join us for the next half hour or so. And welcome to a number of other God Before Guns members who are also on the call, and anyone who is joining us via Facebook Live. We're glad you're here. My name is Mimi Plevin Faust. I'm a vice president of God Before Guns. We are a multi-faith coalition working to reduce gun injuries and deaths. We do that by all legal and nonviolent means. We educate, we advocate, we collaborate with other groups. We see ourselves as a group that's especially working on bringing other groups working on this issue together. And we also, because we are a multi-faith coalition, that it does include some people who are, faith leaders. We do some things that are related to helping people heal spiritually in a time of great distress and grief around gun violence, which seems to be ongoing. So we have had vigils after certain mass shootings, but we never have a vigil without marrying that with action, without specific calls to action and instructions that people who attend can do, because we feel that's also very, very important. So we've had forums, we've had marches, we've advocated against and for certain bills in Columbus and the State House. So we do all different things. And I specifically am a writer and poet and Airbnb host, and I joined God Before Guns right as it was forming after the Newtown shootings, when I was, like many people, we were just outraged and wanting to make a difference. And I met Lori O'Neill shortly after that also. And Lori is a longtime activist working to reduce gun violence, but then she, I think, is especially fascinating to me, and I'm so glad I met her because she has very specific ideas about how people can empower themselves and change their own behavior to be safer from gun violence without having to wait for legislators who aren't doing what we want them to do. And we'll talk about her ideas there in that area. But then she also recognized at a certain point that she could be more effective in reducing gun violence by switching her activism hat to becoming an inventor and an entrepreneur, creating non-lethal products and trainings that can help people who be safer, whether it is an individual or in the workplace, school, or places of worship. And I'm very excited about what she's doing. It's helped so many people feel more secure. And we're going to talk about all of that. So welcome, Lori.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
It's great to be here with you. And I wanted to start by asking you, if you could talk just a little bit about what initially got you to be interested in working to reduce gun violence, because, I think many of us just feel so tired out and outraged and sick of what's going on in this country, but it does take kind of a specific thing to decide to actually take action. So can you tell us a little bit about how that happened for you?
Thanks. So I will keep it really brief. I was about a 32-year-old divorced mom of one child back in 1992. And after I would tuck Ryan to bed at about 8 o'clock each night, I would have time to sit and kind of think about what I was going to do with my time. And at that very time in the Ohio legislature, the legislature was trying to pass the first concealed carry weapons bill in the state of Ohio. And that struck me as so wrong on so many different levels, but really at a visceral level and in my heart, I did not want Ryan to grow up into inheriting a world in which people carry guns in their pockets against their neighbor.
Right.
Philosophically, that is not the kind of society that I believe Americans want to live in. And spiritually, it's counter to everything I believe in terms of God. So moving from that, thinking about it for a while, I literally wrote a letter to the editor of the Plain Dealer, and they printed it. I couldn't believe it. And
congratulations.
yeah, I was thrilled. And I'd never done anything like that. And I received, back then people could look you up and find out your mailing address and phone
Mm-hmm.
number. And I received a number of calls and letters from people who thanked me for the way that I expressed that. And I was hooked. I felt for the first time in my young life that I had a voice and that I could maybe learn how to use it to do some good. And I started to connect with people that were fighting gun violence in Cleveland, specifically Eric Fingerhut at that time. Had, I think, a group called Gun Safety Ohio. I can't remember. Somebody on here might have been a part of that. And I met a wonderful, amazing woman named Joella Burgoon. God rest her soul. She's no longer with us. And she really took me in hand and taught me lots of things I needed to know about becoming an activist, but really about becoming an empathetic human being. And that launched me. And it's been a long time.
It's wonderful. And as being the parent of one child, also, I totally agree. I totally empathize with that thought of like, oh my gosh, how can I protect this one child that I've put so much love and care into from ever being hurt by a bullet? It definitely is a shared concern. And so, when you first got involved after you wrote that letter, then what did you do?
So I did join a couple of groups here in Ohio, but sadly, and that took a few years. So, kind of fast forward, unfortunately, to, I think it was 1999, if I'm not mistaken, when Columbine took place. And that seemed to really galvanize Americans in a way that previous shootings had not. And that's when the Million Mile March was formed. Donna Dees Thomas's, as many of you know, that she's very famous for having organized the first march on DC for moms, but also all around the country. And I could not go to DC that year, unfortunately. Doesn't matter why, but I couldn't get there. And but I was able to get to a local march, and I then became involved with the Brady campaign to prevent gun violence. Became a local chapter member. Ultimately, I think I served as chapter president for a little while. And over time, I became more and more immersed in the world of advocacy, etc., and did all kinds of things. Went to DC every year for the Brady conference, and did a lot of press conferences here in the Cleveland area to draw attention to shootings and bad gun dealers and a lot of other things. But along the way, what I discovered was that there was an awful lot I didn't know about how our existing laws, whether they be state or federal level, really kind of enable much of the gun violence that we see in our country, because so many of the people who commit gun violence are already disqualified from owning a gun. So they are underage, they have a felony record, they're drug or alcohol users, they may have been declared mentally unable to take care of themselves, etc.
Mm-hmm.
And I discovered that that was an area that no one had really paid much attention to. We talked in very general terms about gun violence, but we didn't drill down and really try to understand who commits it and how they get those guns. So ultimately,
Mm-hmm.
in I think it was 2006, I partnered with another Brady campaign volunteer out of Boston, and we formed Citizens for Safety. So it was a nonprofit. It was dedicated to educating ordinary people as well as politicians, media, about gun trafficking, trying to make that connection between gun policy and gun violence so that ordinary people would understand better how did we get here. And I spent 4 years doing that, I
Mm-hmm.
think, relatively successfully. We developed a seminar at that time, delivered in person, that talked about the sources of guns. How do people who are legally prohibited from owning a gun get their hands on a gun so easily? And so I did that for a long time, 4 years, and ultimately had to move on because I also co-owned a business with my husband, and I couldn't do both. So in 2010, I did leave that, and but have always continued to care very deeply. And then sadly, at the end of 2012, of course, Sandy Hook took place. And if I can back up, earlier that year in February, the shooting at Chardon High School took place. So it was kind of a bookend of 2020.
Right.
February, we started the year, unfortunately, with a school shooting coming to our communities, and we ended the year with the worst. I don't even have words to describe what happened at Sandy Hook, and
Right.
this call, it was moved in the same way. Um, and ultimately, what came out of Sandy Hook was several of my family members who obviously knew that for all those years I had been advocating, around gun violence, sat down. We all sat down together and asked ourselves, what did we notice about that shooting, aside from all the other terror about it? And the one thing we noticed was that those teachers and administrators had no way to defend those children or themselves that day. And that
Right.
led to the next question for us, which was, how can ordinary people caught up in extraordinary violence stop that violence or escape it, if you will, without harming innocent bystanders? And that's when we formed alternative defense strategies, alternative, of course, to guns, to develop products and things that ordinary people could use that would help them in situations like that, again, without permanently injuring anyone else.
It's really fascinating that you guys were so analytical at that time when so many people were so just feeling so emotional and so grief stricken. I think it's very impressive that you guys that you and your family came to those conclusions. I want to talk more about alternative defense strategies. However, I want to back up a little bit first because you and I met in after Newtown, and I was part of a little group that was formed as a result of a call to action for Move On and we called ourselves Cleveland Kids Can't Wait. And you came in, spoke with us we were meeting at Launch House, Shaker Launch House, and talked to us about all different things. But it seemed like almost as an aside at the end, you started talking about all the ways that people could empower themselves to be safer. And I was so struck by that and impressed by that I actually went off once I joined God Before Guns, and we created a gun safety tips card for families and individuals to keep themselves and their families safer and their communities safer, entirely really based on your advice. And I would like to talk to you about that, how you even thought about it, how you thought of it, and also just to go over some of the ideas in the card, because I think they could be really useful to the people who are listening in to help themselves and to help them protect themselves. And we also have given these cards out to more than 30,000 people, and we will be, we have more that we could offer anyone for free. I'm sharing my screen so you can see the cards. It's just a regular small takeaway card. We often have them in, little pamphlet holders all over the community, and they've been handed out at all the Cleveland Metropolitan Housing Authority locations and libraries, schools all over the place. So if you would you share a little bit about how you even started thinking about this?
Sure. So a couple of things happened. During that time when we formed Citizens for Safety, it really arose out of a feeling of frustration and a hunger to understand more that we needed to know about gun violence. Then fast forwarding to alternative defense strategies, I read a book that I would recommend everyone on this call go out and get a copy and read. It is called The Gift of Fear. And it's written by a man named Gavin DeBecker, who owns one of a globally well-known security company. But The Gift of Fear is an important book because it talks about the instincts each of us are born with. It's truly primitive instinct to sense danger and act upon it in a way that preserves your own safety and life. We all have it. Sadly, we're so civilized at this point in our, I guess, country's history, if you will, that many of us really have sort of papered over our native instincts and our antenna when we meet other people or get into situations, and we often ignore what our instincts are telling us, and that leads us into trouble. So, reading that book, I started to think about the very simple, common sense ways that we can avoid trouble. First and foremost, to avoid trouble by being aware of our surroundings. I'm not inventing anything new. I simply tapped into the existing knowledge from people like Gavin DeBecker, law enforcement agencies, etc. But really boiling it down to what you and I can do every day out in the community and in our homes, frankly, to keep ourselves safe, to sense danger before it happens, and to have a plan so that we know how we're going to react in the event that we have to react. So that's much of what I talk about in my personal safety training is really tapping back into that primitive instinct and believing in yourself, which I think is critical for children, especially. They have those instincts, they feel them every day out in the world. But again, we have a tendency to override them out of this notion of being polite to other people, being
Right.
helpful to others. Um, it's those two things don't have to be contradictory, if you will, but they sometimes can be. So that's kind of where my tips came from. I started just thinking about it and reading, and I've been trained by some very amazing people, and I just wanted to sort of condense that down and share it with others.
Hmm. I'd like to, since I have the card up on the screen, just maybe we can go through them a little bit, and I'll just introduce them briefly, and you can talk more about them if you about each one. I think as people who are parents or just people who care about kids, our first thought is how can we keep our kids safe? And one of the easiest and most important ways is the one we have as tip one: always ask if there was a gun in another family's home before your child is allowed to go there. Because many of us feel like, oh, we're not going to encounter this, but there are just a lot of Americans who have guns in their home. And there's several million Americans who have loaded, unlocked guns in their home that children can get their hands on. And so it's critical to, before your child goes anywhere, I just got in the habit of asking any parent, calling in advance and just saying, I ask everyone this, so please don't take it personally, but do you have a gun in your home? And if so, how is it secured? And then, once you get the answer to that, then you can decide what you want to do next. And I think that was one of the important things that you suggested. And did you do that when your son was growing up?
I didn't have the courage to do it when Ryan was growing up. I admit that it's a very uncomfortable conversation to have, and I salute everyone, for working on that campaign to ask, always ask, and to help people formulate that conversation. Just as you said, Mimi, it does not have to be confrontational. It must be diplomatic. It must be compassionate. It must be sort of stated in a way that doesn't make people feel defensive. It sort of joins you together that you both care about your children's safety. So I did not always do that when Ryan was growing up. I wish that I had had more courage, but now I would, do it unequivocally and comfortably. So language.
Mm-hmm. And it's interesting for me, the only time that someone said, yes, we have a gun, but the way they described that they secured it made me feel confident enough to let my daughter go there because they were so careful. So I didn't know that I would say yes, but I did. And tip two, I think, is especially important. And that is, if you own a gun, secure it. And you really talk about all the details, and we have them on this card. There's so many different aspects of securing a gun when it's in your home. And do you want to speak a little bit about any of that?
Um, we could probably talk about home defense with firearms for an entirely different webinar. all the things that I've learned from people who are professionals. I will say that if you do own any kind of gun that you feel you need to have for defense of your home and family, that the most important thing is to ensure that the wrong people don't get their hands on that gun, and that is your children and your other family members. So if you lock it, you keep it, the ammunition and the gun separate, but within reach of one another. I try to be very realistic. I would never pretend that I wouldn't defend my home. My husband owns two guns. I don't even know. They're locked. I don't even know where the keys are. I would use my pepper jug. But having said that, I grew up around guns. I'm very familiar with how to operate long guns, handguns, etc. I just choose not to own a handgun. But I do empathize. I understand. If someone came into your home, I understand the instinct to want to defend it. The problem is that too often those guns that are there for an honorable purpose get used in a way that harm the people who live in that home. So I think keeping the ammunition and the gun separate is very important. There is no reason that you can't practice quickly grabbing the gun, unlocking wherever you are keeping that ammunition, loading that gun, and getting ready. In fact, if you have made a decision to own a gun, you owe it to yourself and the people around you to understand how it works. Because don't wait until it's an emergency to figure out that this thing is a deadly weapon and I really don't know what I'm doing. That's
Right.
like more irresponsible than owning a gun, is owning a gun and not having any clue how to use it appropriately. So, when we talk about those things, even like cleaning and handling a gun, my brother-in-law is now a retired police officer from Michigan. He was a training officer, he was a SWAT member, etc. He has had 2 accidental discharges while cleaning his guns over his lifetime. It can happen to anyone, even the most experienced people. So I think respect for that tool is incredibly important, and the understanding that it can happen. I could talk about all kinds of recommendations for if you're, what type of firearm to have, if you must have one for your home defense, but that would be for another time.
Well, I think, some of the tips that we have on this card that I think that you recommended that really impressed me were, one, about never, ever leaving the gun unattended, even for a second, if you bring it out to clean it or whatever. I mean, children are so quick and they're so curious, and they probably know where your gun is hidden and where your ammo is hidden, even if they never, ever tell you that. And also the idea that you want to not allow even your teenager to have access to the gun, because what if you don't know that your teenager is depressed or upset or mad at someone, and your teenager grabs your gun and goes and shoots up the school? I mean, you do not want that to happen in your family. And so, or your teenager takes your gun and shoots themselves, which has happened in families all over America, and is such a heartbreaking tragedy. So there's so many contingencies to think of, but it's important to think of them in advance.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then the second thing that the card talks about, that was something you talked about in our conversation, and maybe the thing that affects the most people in the United States, is preventing suicides. Because what many people who have a gun in their home don't realize is that the biggest danger to them is that they or someone else in the family might grab the gun in a moment of despair and kill themselves. And you certainly never dream that that could happen when you bring a gun into your home. And yet they have shown that often people who commit suicide, or I guess have lived long enough to, live to tell the story, they may fall into a moment of despair and go and grab their gun and shoot themselves as quickly as 30 seconds, which is so horrifying to me and so unimaginable. But if someone has a breakup, or they lose their job, or there's just a million things that can pile on, especially now with all the terrible things that are happening to people. And the very important thing to recognize is that, it makes it even more important to make sure that your gun and your ammunition are locked up separately, which could slow a person in your family down should they, you know, get this idea. But if you become aware that you or someone in your family or someone else you know that owns a gun is at risk of suicide, at risk of depression, uh, the the suggestion we have is just ask them, you know, if you could take their firearm and store it off site for a while till they're over the hump, till they're feeling more steady, more stable. And the same thing for yourself. If you see that you are feeling depressed or upset, or you've just lost a job, or you've just broken up with someone, you know, tell a friend, here, just take my gun for a couple of weeks. I mean, people rarely do that, but there's nothing wrong with doing that.
Yeah. And I mean, two of the things, so there's another great book um, by a man named David Hemingway, who is at the Harvard School of Public Health. I think it's called Public Guns, Private Health, if I'm not mistaken. Another one of the kind of Bibles that has guided me. It's basically a compendium of gun-related research, and much of it is around suicide. And two things have always struck me and stuck with me. First, people who attempt suicide using means other than firearms, so pills or even, you know, trying to hurt themselves or whatever it might be, they fail far more often than they succeed, believe it or not. And among those who fail to complete a suicide, if they are given access to treatment and counseling, the vast majority of them never attempt suicide again. So again, it is
Right.
a moment of despair. It seems like the end of the world, particularly in the adolescent brain. So, you know, young people up to the age of around 24 or so, their brains don't always even have the capacity yet to see into the future and understand that the problem that feels insurmountable today will be forgotten in 30 days from now, and I'll be able to move on. And so in that moment, of despair, they can, you know, off themselves, unfortunately, and of course, you know, devastate their families and everything. So means matter. If you have access to a gun and that's your means, sadly, people who attempt suicide with a firearm succeed far more often. And so just not having access in the moment, particularly if you have children, I would say between the ages of maybe 14 on up to maybe 20, 22. A lot of times they're college, they're in and out of your household, but store your firearms with a relative or a friend. Use an alternative method of defense. Make your plans. The more trained you are, the less fearful you will be that something's actually going to happen to you in your home. And if it does, you will know what to do. So knowledge always overcomes fear, and might be the
Good
best
point.
decision you ever made, you know, on behalf of your children and their mental and emotional health during that time of their lives. And then, you know, going forward, just again, having that plan. Believe me, there's so much you can do to secure your home, and plans that you can make in the event that someone would come in or violate your home in some way. And I think the more that people understood that and knew it and practiced it, whether it's just mental practice, which is very important, or actually physically practicing, I think we would really cut down on a lot of, I think, irrational fear, but we would also enable people to take care of themselves and defend themselves if they have to.
It's very interesting. And I just want to say, uh, in our country, sadly, two-thirds, between 60 and 66% of all gun deaths every year are suicides, which
Yeah,
is so
tragic.
tragic. And really of all ages. It just
Yes.
cuts across. And many people are seniors, many people are middle-aged, and more often it's men, but it's also women. Um, I was having a conversation with a group of people about, you know, just these issues, and several of the people at the table realized that they had a relative that had killed themselves with a gun, you know, and they hadn't even put two and two together that this was a gun violence issue.
Right.
So it's all around us. The other tips, and I think we should just go through them more quickly, but the next one is preventing accidental shootings, or having your gun used against you. And this is about when, well, for women who are experiencing domestic abuse, their chances of actually being murdered by their abuser go up by 7 times if the abuser has access to a gun, even their own gun, even the woman's own gun. So that's a very dangerous situation for them, but also for so many people who think that they will be safer if they can carry a gun around town. Um, the, the statistics show that they are 4 to 5 times more likely to be shot if they are carrying a weapon than if they are not. So, you know, that weapon that you're carrying can be turned against you so easily. And that's definitely something to consider. And then just the fact of having a gun in your home increases your chances of having some type of tragedy happening in your home, whether it's suicide or accidental shooting or murder within your home, by a staggering amount. So it's something to really consider. And then the fourth tip is consider pepper spray or pepper gel, and that's something I think, Lori, that you could talk about as an alternative to having a gun.
Yeah, I never thought I'd become an expert in pepper gel. Um, when we invented SafeZone CM, which is our non-lethal defense system that my dad and
Say the product names again, because I don't think we heard
I,
it.
sorry, Safe Zone, and then C like in Charlie, M like in Mom, which stands for
Mm-hmm.
countermeasure. So it's essentially what they call a defense countermeasure, how you fight that. But Safe Zone CM is primarily about pepper gel. That is the centerpiece of the product, and we can talk more about that elsewhere. But in developing our product for ordinary people, I could talk for 4 days about this, and I try to keep it. It's so hard for me to keep it brief because it's my passion. Um, One of the things that we studied first was how does the human body react under duress, under threat? Again, we go back to primitive fight or flight. We lose our fine motor skills. We have tunnel vision, so we narrow in terms of what we can focus on. Our ears actually don't operate perfectly. The sound becomes sort of distorted. We have pounding hearts and shaking hands. We're sweating profusely. And in a situation like that, even trained police officers, the most highly trained people we have, miss shots with guns over 75% of the time. So
That's
imagine being,
staggering.
yeah, it is staggering. Imagine just being you and me, ordinary people, not highly trained, not engaged in that type of activity on a regular basis. And having pepper gel means essentially that you don't have to have a good aim because you can just spray in a wide pattern and you're going to probably hit that person in the face. So it takes care of the lack of fine motor skills. It's simple to dispense. You don't, I mean, other than having to have use of your hands, you don't have to physically do anything else. And essentially, you can aim and correct even if you miss. But the point is that it's a great, if you will, I hate the term weapon, but it is a weapon. It's a great weapon for people who don't have a high level of skill. And
Right.
that's who we were designing our product for. So I, of course, doing what I do, I carry pepper gel everywhere I go in public. The reason I use gel versus spray is that spray doesn't go very far. First of all, it only goes about 6 to 8 feet. And one of the key principles in self-defense is not allowing someone to get that close to you by
Right.
virtue of your awareness and some other things. But in any case, so if it only goes a few feet, that means that person got way too close to you. You probably have to do some other things at that point. But a pepper gel will shoot much further, 15, 18, 20 feet. So
Really.
react more quickly to the threat and reach that person. It also sticks and clings, and it doesn't blow back on you. Spray comes right back at you with the air current, and you end up being contaminated as well. So pepper gel is I don't sell pepper spray, honestly. I only sell pepper gel because I believe in it that strongly. I've used it. I train other people to use it. Very effective. And it is a momentary and temporary fire. I always call
Mm-hmm.
it like lighting somebody's face on fire, but it will not permanently injure or harm them. So it may sound cruel, but in a life or death situation or in an attack, being able to do that and escape, because that's all you're really trying to do is stop somebody from their intended action long enough for you to escape to safety. That's really the entire point of a non-lethal weapon of any kind.
Right. And
And
then also, oh, I'm sorry to interrupt. I was just going to
no,
say two very important points are that one, you won't be accidentally killing someone. You
correct,
wouldn't be accidentally shooting a bystander. You wouldn't be killing the person, even killing the person who's attacking you, and you wouldn't risk having your gun, a gun turned against you and killing
right.
you.
Yeah. I mean, when I talk sometimes to people about having pepper gel in their home versus a gun, um, sometimes they'll say, well, what if my kids get a hold of it and they shoot each other? And I always say, yeah, I wouldn't want that, but nobody's going to die that day. I mean, it's going to hurt. It's going to be unpleasant. There's going to be a mess in the house, but no one's going to die. Can you
Right.
say that about your firearm? You know, so.
Very good point. And then the last tip on our card is about protecting the community, and that is don't buy firearms for anyone else ever. And it's kind of amazing, but straw buying, which is when you are buying a gun for someone who shouldn't have one, I believe is the FBI says the most common way that criminals can get weapons. And often they're pressuring a woman that they know. They're pressuring their girlfriend or their sister or their wife, or some woman is being pressured into buying that weapon for that man. And store owners will report that, the woman is the person technically buying it, but the man is looking at it. The man is, asking about it, and on and on. And it's, it's a felony to do that, to buy the gun for someone else who shouldn't have it. And or sometimes women are being pressured to hold a gun, to hide it, or all different things. And just find a way not to do that for anyone else, because you don't want to be guilty of that crime and be punished yourself, and also feel the guilt that you provided a gun to someone who then used it to harm other people.
Yeah.
So those are all the different ways that you and I talked about that we put into these cards, and have been now distributed all over Northeast Ohio and in many other states. And we have them for free for anyone who would like some. And, you can request a lot of them through our website, God Before Guns. And I think that the link might be in the chat, but if you go to our website, godbeforeguns.org, you can find these very easily and find out how to contact us and request one if you like. And the statistics the sources for all the statistics are on that webpage also. So I want to thank you, Lori, because through that one conversation we had, hopefully many other people are around our area and in other places are safer. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
And I want to talk to you now a little bit more about also what you do in your company in alternative defense strategies. So if you could tell us a little bit about that, and I will also bring your picture up on the screen in just a second.
Okay.
We're going to, and unfortunately, we've talked so much that I think that we're going to have to talk about this more briefly than I would have liked, and
That's okay.
I apologize.
I think a picture is worth 1,000 words. I've
Yes,
described
I'll bring it
already
up.
the thought behind what we invented, and it was simply, this is it right here. You can see that there is a 16-ounce canister of pepper gel. That pepper gel will project up to 25 feet, so that is quite a distance. And the entire point of it for schools, churches, businesses, any organization, first of all, is at risk of workplace or gun violence at much greater rates than we are generally aware of, because we don't see media coverage of shootings or violence that may injure or take the lives of fewer than 3 people. So if you don't hear about it as a mass shooting, you may never hear about it, but unfortunately it happens daily. So what we did was essentially take this pepper gel It'll go 25 feet. It's very easy to operate. We call it a fire extinguisher for violence. And we put it in steel cabinets that can be hung on the walls of, again, any organization. We advise them where to deploy these throughout your facility. We train people how to use them, etc. And they come in different ways. So the SafeZone cabinet with the lock on it, the keypad lock, is intended for schools, churches, houses of worship, anywhere that serves people from young on up to adult ages. So when you have vulnerable populations, is what we call them, because they could be people who are ill or mentally ill or something like that. This is appropriate because it prevents the wrong people from getting into the cabinet. The big tall one in the middle is the same thing, except that it includes a bleeding control kit. Again, a subject we could talk about another day, but in that bleeding control kit, it is not a first aid kit. It is filled with products that stop excessive bleeding, generally bleeding that results from gunshots. So trauma kits and bleeding control kits came into popularity after Sandy Hook. Again, there was a lot of study and realization that if facilities had access to these types of products, a lot more people could be kept alive while they're waiting for police to go through, take out that shooter, or decide that the threat is gone. Unfortunately, sometimes it takes so long that people who have been injured may bleed out. Unfortunately, I'm sorry to use a term like that, but something like up to 40% of people who die from these mass shootings do so because first aid couldn't get to them in time. So the thought is, if we put these trauma kits in the facilities, and for us it's along, we call it defend and treat, maybe there's a greater chance that we could save more lives. And then the last box, which is more plain, is really just, doesn't have a lock on it. It has a security loop that can be broken in case of emergency, which you can't see in the photo. And that is basically for corporate or adult environments. And so that's kind of it. It's very simple, but it works.
Right, and you've worked with schools all over the country. Is that correct? And
Yeah,
places of
we have
worship.
kind of a really strange geographic distribution of our schools. As a, for instance, the largest school system in the state of Alaska is a customer of ours. They have over 45 school buildings and 18,000 kids, which up there is big. Here it's not as big, but we were thrilled when they found us and contacted us. In fact, they just ordered more of our cabinets this week. We also have our product in the Cleveland Jewish Federation's headquarters in Beechwood. Oh, I don't want to make a big, I kind of not talk about sometimes where we are because we don't want people to know that the system is in there. But we are all very proud that so many houses of worship and religious organizations have chosen our product because it does mesh with the philosophy of nonviolence and what most organized religions represent. So we're very proud of those connections. Manufacturers, schools, churches. We're trying to think anybody else that's really interesting. But like,
Well, I have to say, I
Yeah.
often think that newsrooms should
Yes.
all get your products, considering the threats that they get on a daily basis. I
Yep.
think they should be, and you always train people before you allow them to have the products
Yes, very
too.
much so. We require our proprietary training with every sale, so we will not sell our product without training. We require it. So it's just too important for people to understand how to deploy something like this at the appropriate time.
And how far do these devices shoot, the pepper gel?
25 feet, which
That's
is,
amazing.
yeah, it's further than you think.
Right.
When we get called in to meet with organizations, we generally will take a training unit. So we train using a gel formulation that has no heat to it. It's called inert training gel, but it teaches people exactly what it feels like to use the product, allows them to see how far it projects, and allows them to acquire a target. We actually will do target practice, and people are often amazed at how far it goes. So
That's great.
yeah.
So I'm trying. Oh, here now I was waiting for it to go, and there we go. So I just wanted to very quickly go through these other
Yep.
slides.
So,
And also, Lori, where could people find out more about this or get in touch with you? Could you just tell us very
so if you
quickly?
are interested, you can call me. I have no objection at all to God Before Guns providing my telephone number. You can also visit SafeZoneCM.com, so just the name of the product.com, and learn a lot more detail about our products, our philosophy, our story as a family. And that will also direct you to contact me directly. We do not sell online because, again, we want to be very careful and very educational in our approach to our customers.
Sure.
So anyway, and real briefly, this little sling bag that you see on your screen right now is simply called SafeZone Go. It's a very small bag that allows you to take that full-size canister with you wherever you go, but do it discreetly. And it came out of a request from one of our largest customers, which happens to be a big mega church. They have like 2,000 people come in for services on Sunday, and even though they have our cabinets deployed around the perimeter of the sanctuary, as well as other places in their building, they were concerned that if someone were able to get past them, what would happen to all the people worshiping? And so we designed this for their volunteers to sit among the congregation and have it in the event that they would need it. It's also good for personal defense. It's great for anything because it's mobile, and yet no one would know that that was going to happen. So,
Nice. And this was the last slide that you brought.
yep. And finally, just my favorite part, the thing that means the most to me about any of this is the opportunity to share with other people what I've learned about personal safety. I have been a beneficiary of very generous people in the ATF, FBI, you name it, all the alphabet soup agencies that I've worked with over the years because of the advocacy work and the education work I've done. And that's what I share with people. I think it's very confidence producing for people to understand violence, the nature of it, the nature of people who actually commit violence, why you're different from them, and why being prepared can actually mean the difference between, maybe getting hurt and not. So that's my favorite thing to do right there, is to just share what I've learned with others.
That's great, Lori. So I'll take down the slide because I think that for the people who have been nice enough to stay on, and I know we're running a little bit long, there are some questions. And if I don't know if Dave has wants to share them, or are there there's some great comments in the chat. I think that there's a lot of great comments in the chat. So I do see that we have one question in the Q&A. Does it feel like all the progress you have made is being pushed back in this current environment? That's a big question. I have some thoughts about it, but Lori, do you want to say anything?
Oh gosh, I have wrestled with the feeling of failure in the area of gun violence prevention reduction since I started. I think anybody in the movement for any length of time feels incredibly frustrated with that feeling. But when we look around, I think particularly after Sandy Hook, I do believe the way that Americans look at gun violence has changed. And there has been progress in a lot of states in terms of legislative progress. And I think that we are in a temporary aberration of the time, and one that will hopefully start to turn a tide again. There's no question that the work can never stop, because during COVID even, I think that people have been so preoccupied with that and just trying to get through a day with their families and their children that they haven't thought about things like this. Almost a luxury, if you will, to think about advocacy at a time when we're dealing with the global pandemic. And then sadly, it has allowed gun violence to increase and creep back in. So I think it points out the fact that we can never ever rest. But I think that we've found more and more people who feel the way that we do. So
I agree with you.
Yeah.
I think that when we look at the national legislation, it's not there yet. I mean, it's very disappointing. But I do believe that on the state level, there have been huge numbers of successes all over the country, quite a lot, and that doesn't get as much attention. And in terms of the funding of candidates, there's more money coming from people who are advocating to reduce gun violence and those policies than from the NRA and their organizations. I mean, the NRA has been so discredited by their disgraceful, corruption. I think that and involvement with Russia. So I think that they've lost a lot of their luster. And the Democrats in the past never, I mean, they didn't always come out and state clearly that they were for just the simplest gun violence reduction laws. And now it's clearly become something that Democrats feel that and believe that they need to do because of their voters want there to be common sense gun safety laws passed. So I do think that there's a change. I think that young people are best leaders and have made a huge difference in the country, and their attitudes are critical. So I'm hopeful. I'm frustrated right now, but also hopeful. And do we have any other questions that we, let me see if there's something else. Do we have any other questions that we can answer from anyone right now? Does anyone want to speak up or ask anything? Dave, do you see any other questions that we can answer? If not, then I think we're going to wrap up. And Lori, I just want to tell you I can't thank you enough for being with us, and thank you to everyone who's attending and for sticking with us through our longer than expected call. And you can find out more about Lori's company at safezonecm.com. Is that correct?
Yes.
And you can find out about our gun safety tips cards at godbeforeguns.org, and you can scroll through the menu choices and you'll find them very easily. So thank you all so much. And thank you, Lori. It is always illuminating to talk to you, and I really admire what you do, and I want to try to help you get more publicity as much as I can.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And thank you for
really
having
inspired me.
The interest, Mimi, that you've shown in our progress and our ideas over time. And I would just also say to anyone on here that has an interest in personal safety training, please call me. I oftentimes do it at no charge because it's so important to me that everyone have a plan, everyone understand a subject that can be scary, but I think we take some of the fear out of it. And so if I can help you in any way, I'm here to do that.
Great. And God Before Guns will continue these courageous conversations. I think we have another one coming up very soon.